Technology has changed so many things. Like, for example, getting a DNA test. It used to be, well, a lot of work and a lot of money. Now, for less than $200 and you can spit in a tube, you can get back a lot of results. Like, for example, I was out with some friends of mine and a gentleman came up to me and said, I have to tell you what happened to 23andMe with me. And I'm like, I don't really know you, but that's okay. It was a little awkward. But he proceeded to tell me that when he took this DNA test, he actually found out that his father was not actually his father. His uncle was his father. It's like this whole weird story. And then I ran across a story about Eve Wiley. And Eve is now joining us here on the Kim Komando Show because her story and DNA tests, well, let's just say it's very, very interesting. Hi there, Eve.
Hi, how are you?
So thanks for joining us. And
Thank you so much for having me.
And so tell me, how did you decide, first of all, to go ahead and get a DNA test? And what prompted you to do that?
Well, one of the things you do when you're donor conceived is you do these DNA tests because it's a way to identify a donor or identify your half siblings. For me, my son was struggling with some pretty significant medical health issues. And so his doctors identified using 23andMe plus health as a way to gain some genetic variations on him instead of putting him under for surgery. So those are the reasons why I took both of those tests.
And so 23andMe Health, what was the result of that DNA test first of all, with your son, and how's your son doing now?
So he is doing fantastic now. What we identified was that he had an autoimmune disorder called celiac disease. And that was not something that anyone in my family or in my mom's side or on my sperm donor side had. So we weren't reporting that complete medical history. And so that's what came up. And he's doing fantastic now that we've identified that.
And so that's like one of the great benefits of having a DNA test is that you can narrow down these type of situations. Now, you mentioned the term donor conceived. Explain that for everyone.
So being donor conceived means that your parents used a sperm donor or an egg donor, and sometimes you can be double donor conceived. And so in my particular situation, my parents were struggling with infertility, and they selected a sperm donor from California Cryobank, and then that's how I was supposed to be born.
But it wasn't exactly an anonymous sperm donor, right?
No, not an anonymous sperm donor that they selected and they consented to.
And so getting back to the DNA test, that's when you identified that maybe your father wasn't exactly anonymous.
Right. DNA is like a crystal ball, right? DNA doesn't lie. People lie. And what I found is that I connected to a first cousin who I assumed was a half brother that was donor conceived. Once we were communicating and kind of going through this, and he didn't think that being donor conceived was his story. So we went back to 23andMe and we looked at the connection. And he told me about his uncles. And he said one of his uncles was Dr. McMorris, which is my mother's fertility doctor. So my mother's fertility doctor is actually my biological father instead of the sperm donor that they selected and consented to, and the sperm donor that I have called dad for the last 13 years is not my biological father.
That must have been quite the shock for everybody, right?
Yes. That was my truth. That was my life. That was my reality for 13 years. And to have that not parent expected result come rolling in it's very difficult to accommodate and assimilate that into your sense of identity. And, these commercial DNA testing websites, they absolutely are blowing the lid off of family secrets.
Oh, they are. I mean, I don't know if you heard me talk about it in the beginning that a person who I don't really even know came to me and said, listen, my father's not my father, my uncle's my father, and now my grandmother's my aunt. I mean, it was like this whole story. And I'm like, wow, that's just really crazy stuff. And
It is.
so now your mother and yourself, that you're trying to pass some legislation.
Yes. We are.
So tell us a little bit about that.
So, once I discovered this information, it was very difficult. I was trying to organize it and assimilate and accommodate this into my sense of identity in my life. I felt like I had no control over anything. I didn't consent to this. I didn't choose this, but I was stuck here reaping the consequences of something that I didn't do. So I identified really early on that the only healing to take place with this was to make it bigger than myself. And I was just completely appalled by the fact that there is nothing. There's not a civil cause of action. There's not a criminal cause of action for this fact pattern. And this is a perfect example of how technology is 30 years ahead of the law.
Right.
So
I'm surprised that there really wasn't any legislation beforehand. I mean, so a fertility doctor could just say, okay, well, here we go, and I guess I will just father all these kids
yes,
without the
their
woman
knowledge or
consenting.
consent.
Oh, that's crazy.
And there's no measurable accountability. It could be argued that it's unethical, but at this point, having a almost 70-year-old man retire his medical license is just a mere formality at this point. So that's what I did. For the last 5 months, have gone to Austin, which is about 3.5 hours from Dallas, and I tell my story anywhere from 8 to 14 times. I've testified in the House, I've testified in the Senate, and Senator Huffman, she's the one that drafted the language that expands the definition of sexual assault to include this fertility type fraud.
And then what would happen as a result?
So as a result, it would be per count, and she took the punishment down to a state jail felony just to not really water down traumatic rape, and so it's 2 years per count. So it'd be 2 years per insemination. For example, there's 4 illegitimate inseminations because I have 3 half siblings who are illegitimate.
So how did you find them? I mean, have you actually met them?
I've met one, and then I've talked to the other 2, and through 23andMe, and I actually just had one pop up yesterday.
Did you really?
I was like, you're the first to know.
Oh my gosh, I just found another brother
yeah.
and another sister. Who knew?
Like, oh my God, how many of us are out there running around? It's so weird.
You know,
So-
there's actually a ramification to that if you think about it. I mean, how would you not know? I mean, let's say that you met somebody. I mean, and you didn't know that you were actually related to them.
Right.
And then you get together and then you start having children.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of a sudden you just open up this whole Pandora's box.
The biodiversity concern here is a real problem. And when we are looking at these prolific sperm donors, for example, who have hundreds of offspring, it's a problem. If you build out that family tree, you're looking at their children, their children's children. And how do you know? I mean, I grew up in a small community. I grew up with these people just in a neighboring town, and I had no idea. They're roughly my age. And then what about their children's children?
Right.
It could be a huge biodiversity concern for sure.
So now, is your biological father still alive?
He is, and he is still practicing.
Okay. Do you have any desire to meet him?
You know, I've met him before, and I really think at this point, not really. I recognized early on that my existence is a direct reflection of his character, and in doing so, I'm not really sure how we can navigate a genuine and authentic relationship.
So, how did you actually find out you were donor conceived?
Because I was a really nosy teenager. My mom was a school nurse, and I was going through all of her emails trying to get all the juicy gossip on my cohort. And I came across her correspondence with California Cryobank. And then that's how I found out I was donor conceived.
And you went to your mom and she explained everything.
Yes, I told her that I knew that Doug was not my biological father, and then I told her the communications that I'd come across, and I felt like she was a little more relieved. She was trying to figure out how to tell me and didn't know how to tell me. So I think it probably took a little bit of the pressure off of her.
Well, I'm so proud of you. I'll tell you that.
Thank you.
I mean, what you're doing and how you are spearheading this effort. I mean, it really, it's not just time. You are emotionally vested in this.
Yes.
And you are behind this, I can tell, 1,000%. And
I am.
And it's really wonderful.
Important to protect, the future vulnerable people who are using these artificial reproductive technologies. And that was something that was really important to me to do.
And it's only going to get more prevalent because I'm sure you know that many young women now in their 20s and 30s, they're freezing their eggs thinking, okay, now I'm going to get a career first and then later on, that's when I'm going to start having a family. Well,
Right.
maybe at that point, they think that they have an anonymous donor and it may not necessarily be anonymous. So now we just see the family tree going on and on and on. Eve, thank you so much for joining us, and keep us
Thank you
posted
so much.
on the legislation. And if you have any more news to share, just know we're all friends here at the Kim Komando Show, okay?
Great. Thank you for having me
Got
on.
it. Thanks, Eve. And you see, ladies and gentlemen, this is just an example of how technology that's been put out there for the good, well, there's some ramifications that we all need to keep track of. And if you have a story that you'd like to share, head over to my website. Go to komando.com, and at the bottom of the page, just hit the link that says Contact Us. Hey, thanks for watching. Now, a few things. Don't forget to click the like button and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more digital know-how, check out all these other great links.